All right. Welcome to. Okay, we restart. Welcome to another episode of Plain Air, the only podcast that's never ever had to re record anything due to inexperience or technical errors.
We're your hosts, Sally Deng.
And AJ Dungo. As a creative, I'm interested in those unspoken, often overlooked, yet indelible moments of everyday life. In other words, those little things that stick with us. And Agnes Lee is not only really great at capturing those moments, but she's able to do so with seemingly minimum effort. And obviously, we find out that's not the case, but she makes it look so easy. And I've always been in awe of her illustrations because I think she has this unique gift of creating subtle yet extremely powerful art. We met Agnes at Art Center, no surprise. She was my TA actually. Originally from the Bay Area, she studied at UC Berkeley before she went on to study illustration at Art Center College of Design. She is a former Chronicle Books Fellow and was an art director at the New York Times. She also illustrated the Times Metropolitan Diary column for several years. I know she's super, super talented and obviously super busy.
When I met Agnes, she exuded this confidence that post grad students usually did. You know, they're very sure of themselves and they have a very clear direction of what they want to do with their career because they had already spent 4 years achieving a different degree. And I was really moved by her comic work. After she graduated and after I had graduated, I got a DM after I had published in Waves, and it was Agnes. She wanted to know how to write a book, like how to go about even starting a project like that. And I was really touched that she reached out, and not having much of a relationship with her, it was like pretty cool to be reached out to by someone you looked up to in school. And we had a good conversation. And what resulted of that was her incredible graphic novel, 49 Days.
Yeah, Agnes is just so chill. Like throughout our conversation, we talked about some pretty heavy topics, but the time really flew by. There were a few moments where I forgot we were doing an interview, and I kind of got lost in the flow of it, and I had to remind myself, like, oh, like, don't you're supposed to lead this somewhere. You can't just keep going on and on and on. She has a schedule.
It didn't help that there was a slight delay since we were recording this remotely, and her cat Muta was constantly
Muta,
making her
muta.
making her presence known. You'll hear her throughout the interview, stomping around, using the bathroom, and meowing a little bit.
So let's just jump right into it. Here's our conversation with the fantastic Agnes Lee. Maybe because we met you when you were, close to graduation. So to me, coming in, learning just still my foundation skills, seeing your comics, and like it felt like you had a very clear sense of what you want to do, or at least what kind of art you wanted to make. Not necessarily a style, because I remember thinking, because you always made a lot of zines, and I have a few zines too that I nabbed from your scholarship walls and graduation walls that it's like in storage right now. But they were always great quality, printed like on high quality paper that I'm like, ooh, I gotta get that. You were so generous with that.
Yeah, you're just giving them out for free. What the heck?
Yeah, they were all free. It wasn't like limited to special people, just anyone walking by can grab one. But I remember flipping through one of them and just thinking like, "Oh, okay." Especially when I first started art center, it was very much I was very much focused on drawing traditionally, being a draftsman, and then you were my TA too, so you saw me like kind of working in that direction, but then seeing your work and then going like, oh, it doesn't necessarily have to be what I thought of as what like that narrow view of what an illustrator can do or
Mhm.
be, and just the way you told stories, because I remember like there were some zines that just had like no writing, and
Yeah.
it's just like highlighted the art, and it was just very quick simple art too. And I mean, I don't know where I'm going with this. It's just like you are a very good person to look up to.
Wow. I'm very, very flattered. Thank you. Thank you. That's funny that you say that because I do remember Art Center being like, I know exactly what I want out of this. I think because I had already gone to college. I
Mhm.
graduated from Berkeley. So I had already had 4 years under my belt. And I was like, I'm going to be in debt again, or I'm going to be in more debt. And like, I don't want to spend too much time. So I really approached Art Center with a very like clear idea. It's like, I also wanted to be like very much of a draftsman, but I think like, during all the classes and whatnot, I started to realize that like the draftsman quality and like knowing how to do that is just like a really good foundational skill. Because at the end of the day, like the heart what the heart wants, and you're just gonna create what you want to create. And I think that is why zines and comics became such a good outlet for me because I could really explore different narratives and different uh, comic formats and styles too. Like I don't think I draw the way I did back in Art Center now. So yeah, it's very interesting, but it's also interesting to hear like an outside perspective of what I was going through at the time.
What gave you the nudge to explore comics in school? Like, what were you? Was that something at Berkeley you had imagined you'd be making, or was there someone at Art Center that exposed you to that?
At Berkeley, I definitely was interested in comics. I think when I was a freshman, I started like discovering like American comics. Like I didn't know the group of like Batman, Superman, like all like the Marvel DC lore. And so I started reading those and I was really taken with Jim Lee's artwork. And I was also like, oh cool, a Korean American in like this very like kind of white base. And so that was really awesome to see. But he's also like a very talented artist. So I was like, wow, that's really cool. Like there's all these different art styles and like I think I want to tell these kind of stories. Sorry, my cat is going to the bathroom in the background. Let's try to edit that out.
It's
Um,
okay. We have a special guest.
yeah, maybe he'll stop by. Uh, but even prior to that, growing up, like, my parents, immigrant parents, they would never pay for daycare, right? So library it was. So I spent a lot of time in the library and I found the comic section. And outside of like manga, I was like, whoa, this is really interesting. Like I was looking at some European comics and then I discovered like Will Eisner and yeah, just seeing the breadth of styles and also narrative styles, I was like, wow, that's really interesting. And I didn't think it was something I could pursue until until Art Center. Like I think I was interested in Berkeley and I did a couple things of like folk tales, Korean folk tales. But at Art Center, that's when I felt pretty empowered to do like sorry, pretty empowered to do my own stories. Um, And then I do want to mention that, like, I think even before I was interested in comics, I think the base of my interest was like picture books. Like in
Mm.
kindergarten, I remember being like super interested in the fairy tale books that like my teachers would read and like gravitating to the art. And then when I was at the library, I would pick and choose my favorite illustrators and then I would hide the books because I love them so much. And
Awesome.
yeah, and then just like and then I would choose books based on the art too, which maybe led to like my interest in graphic design later. But yeah, so there was always like a tie between art and book form throughout my life, I would say.
That's really funny because I share a similar experience in that, I spent a lot of time in the library as a kid too. No babysitter, no daycare, none of that. But the thing is, like, I discovered manga there and maybe some like Korean comics, some Chinese comics, and I was like, "Oh my god, what is this?" But then when I saw American comics, like the Marvel DC thing, I was so like repulsed by the drawings because it was just like these big muscle people, and it's also like I can appreciate them now, but like the line work is much more dark and the
Mhm.
contrast is heavy, and like the younger version of me was like, oh, I don't want that. Like, I don't know, I for the longest time that was my preference, like Asian comics, until I went to Art Center and saw this other style of graphic novels like yours, and like Daniel Clowes, like that kind of like there's an in between drawing. Like, but for the longest time, my perception of American or Western comics were just like DC style,
Mhm.
like big giant buff Batman in the dark, or like, just a
Yeah.
little. It was very intimidating to me, I guess, is
Oh.
what I'm saying.
I think manga had the that effect on me. I was like, I'm intimidated by their art style because like I was reading like Clamp and like Fushigi Yugi, and I was like,
Um,
yeah, this shit is good. And there's like no way I can do this. Like I cannot copy it. Whereas like American comics, I really felt like, oh yeah, I could copy that. No, no problem.
I mean, would you say that before your amazing graphic novel was published, would you say that people would know you more from your comics in the New York Times?
Yeah. So what I do for the New York Times, just the Metro Diary, I wouldn't call those comics. So I think like, but I think that is what I'm most well known for, just because by sheer numbers, doing like a weekly column for like 4 years, I would hope that people would recognize my name. But other than that, I think I keep a really low profile, and I don't think people know too much about me. And I also keep like a very bad social media profile. I think I post like art stuff maybe once, twice, three times at most a year. Unless I decide to do a dating thing, and then like all I do is complain about it. But yeah, I feel I miss the art center days because like I feel like I don't have the same amount of freedom or time to dedicate to like just doing anymore. Like because my downtime is so much less, and in a way feels a lot more precious. I feel like, okay, if I'm gonna make art, I need to I need to have some kind of output. And then I put a lot of pressure on myself to say like this has to be a good piece of artwork. And then like I get in my head, and then I'm like, let's just not draw. So I'm like in a weird stage where I'm like, I hate my work, but I know I need to like work through my work. And it's just like a weird artist crisis, which I'm sure you both have gone through. I don't think it's unique. Yeah. It is
That
nodding furiously.
yeah, I mean that you kind of touched on that in another interview where you're talking about feeling guilt over being unproductive. And I
Yeah.
think that's such a plague on us as creatives or anyone in any field that requires like a passion turned to like something to monetize.
I know part of me wants to like get rid of my social media, or like I'm fine to post pictures of my cat, but like in terms of like sharing my artwork, it's not, I feel like in this day and age is not something I want to do. Like I feel pressured to do it. But then at the same time I'm like, well, I want to know what my friends are up to too. Um, but for me personally, I think like, yeah, like it takes away the joy of the process. And like, I'm only thinking about the end result. And I think that's also why I haven't really felt motivated or like, or have sought out any freelance jobs. And I turned down some. I don't get contacted a lot, but anything that comes my way, I usually turn down because, like, I don't know, I just feel a lot of pressure. I'm like, I just want to get back to a point where I'm making art that makes me happy. Like, I don't want to try to please anybody else. I don't want to. I don't want to be paid for it right now. Like I really want to just kind of like, yeah, find the joy in it again. And that's been a really big struggle recently.
It's so hard to find that joy again when it's tied up with um, it being your profession, or
Yeah.
just like, because I feel the exact same pressure. I mean, I barely post to social media is kind of like, I mean, there's it's kind of loaded, you know. If we like zoom out a little bit and what it, I mean, for me personally, what it does to my brain and like how much time I waste on it. But the promotional aspect of it and like the performative aspect of it, it's so exhausting, and there is a ton of pressure. And I'm also at that point where I want to. I always, I remember our teachers, like I feel like Brian would say it, or they had they had a point in their careers where they were doing something that worked for a while and they're getting paid for it, but their fulfillment level like
Mhm.
diminished.
Yeah.
And then they were able somehow to take a year off and just find themselves again. And I don't think
Which
and yeah, how are we gonna, I don't think we're afforded that same luxury, like unless we just live off of ramen or something and become homeless. But
Yeah.
yeah, I totally feel you. That's like such a real struggle.
Sometimes I feel like, or maybe it's just, time is just going by really quickly for me, and I'm just not aware of the gaps in between of you posting or not. But I feel like I've always seen you post comics of like diaries or like daily life, like
oh
pieces,
yeah,
like
yeah.
I
here and now.
love
I do
those.
try to do that every year. I'm always late. It's supposed to be February
Um,
1st, and I've never posted on February 1st. But I'm like, "Oh, what a great exercise." And then I agonize over it for like 2 to 3 weeks. And then I'm like, "Okay, this is acceptable."
I don't
Um,
think you're alone in that. I've agonized over that for the last like 7 years. I'm like, I'll get to
yeah, yeah. And I'm like, "Oh, is my life interesting enough? I really didn't do anything." So then I'm like, "Okay, let's choose a day where something is actually happening."
it.
well, I mean that's a good segue because that's a question I wanted to ask because I was looking through your art again, and I think like the things you choose to draw about, it's like everyday life, but it's so like understated, and it's like what do you how do you choose what you want to draw? Like what makes it interesting to you that you want to talk about it? Or like how long, or sometimes like how long does, you know, do you think on it a long time and just go back and forth like, oh, is this worth it or not? Or do you just at a certain point just go like, ah, just draw it, stop overthinking it, go with your instincts?
I always overthink it. Let's make that very clear. There's very few things that I don't overthink. Um, so I don't consider myself a creative person, which is why I think I draw so much from my personal life. And um, and then yeah, I think like it's sometimes either like a punchline or an image that kind of gets stuck in my head, and then I try to build around that. Um, Drawing about my cat is like super easy because it's just very lovable. But when I start getting into like deeper topics, I think those take like a little bit more incubation time. Like the comic that AJ has, forgive me for these terrible things, that was based on like the passing of my friend and like all these dreams I had about him and like how that just kind of like churned, that was just sticking with me. And like and like almost every year I would draw a comic about my friend and his passing. And and so yeah, that was like such a big topic and I just didn't know how to say it in one go. I felt like it was just a topic that I just had to keep coming back to and showing different sides of it. Like yeah, like
Memorial Day is one of them, right?
yeah, Memorial Day is one of them where it's like it was also based on a dream, but like just yeah, just looking back on things, but then like having that realization that that person's not with you any longer. and and then I guess like all those little comics kind of culminated into 49 days. But yeah, like right now I'm also going through I always say like some like mental struggles with like athletic performance. And so there's I've been doing like a lot of like meditation, or I've been trying to do a lot of meditation and like journaling for that. And like there are things of like how like one little thing will like spiral into another. And I'm like, and I know that's like a topic I want to draw about, but I'm looking for like the right vehicle. So, spoiler alert, this is what I'm trying to work on. But like I had this one chapstick where like I was like, I'm not gonna lose this chapstick. And I did really good. Like I went all the way down to the bottom. And then one day I lost it. And I was like, what is wrong with me? Like I was thinking about how like I was getting overconfident and I was putting it in different pockets, different bags. And I was like, no problem. And I was like, oh, I lost it. And then I was like, is this a reflection of myself where like I start things and I can't finish them? And like, am I a terrible person? Like, do I just need to like refocus in my life? Am I getting too ahead of myself? And then like I found the chapstick. I was like, oh, everything's fine. But it's like that kind of stuff where like I'm like, oh, this is like a really good way to talk about like just the noise in your head and how easily that can just
Mhm.
spiral into something very very illogical, but you
I
really
think you
believe
figured it out. That's the
I
comic.
it.
That's brilliant. That's brilliant.
I think you're really good at um just taking a bunch of complicated emotions, like things that are very hard to express, and just like isolating those moments where everyone can be like, that's what I was feeling. But even in the comics, there's no words. Like in a lot of your comics, it's very much like pinpoint moments that like are pivotal in with certain events. Like when you were talking about sports performance, there was this one on your site when I uh, found it. I was like, oh my god, like it's everything I ever felt when I had an injury, but there's like no words. It's
Oh,
the ACL one
oh
where
yeah, yeah,
there's like a series where I'm assuming that happened to you,
yeah.
where like you tore your ACL, and there's a few panels in the comics where everyone was like sending the character, well wishes, telling them to be careful and stuff. And then there's just one image of like where you or the character is alone and is just sitting quietly, just like head down. And I'm just like, oh, that's exactly how I felt when I got like a really bad ankle sprain.
Mm,
Like especially from someone who's like very active and um very used to feeling like you can do anything, or like feeling very confident in your body
mhm.
when you are active, and then going from like 100 to essentially in your mind like zero, because you
Yeah,
can't, and you try not to rely on anyone in that, like all those complicated emotions, like it I mean, I still can't even now like really put into words, but like when I saw that in your comic, I'm like, oh man, Agnes gets it.
yeah,
But
yeah,
I mean, yeah, that's a reflection of like um something that looks really simple, but it takes a lot of time and experience and overthinking, like you said, before you have the end result.
yeah. And I think also maybe it helps me, but like I don't like to write words, so I think that's why I'm like, okay, let's try to find the right image or the right tone. And another thing I wanted to mention is that I also think like in my comics, I like to, at least on the more serious things, I think I like to show sides that isn't like the first thought. Like I think with like injury, it's like, oh, it's like the impact. But one of my teammates recently tore her ACL, and I was like, we should put together a care package and then we should check in on her because it gets really lonely after that beginning aspect because you're just by yourself. And I think not a lot of people are aware of that. And I think that also drives a lot of the decision making.
I mean, that's a testament to how observant you are and how you can isolate these moments. I mean, going back to the comic that I have here, forgive me. I mean, also in 49 days, you're like you handle a lot of those heavy moments with such grace. For instance, I've had many dreams about people I've lost, and there's a moment of recognition that they're gone in the dream, but they don't know that they're gone, you know?
Mhm.
And like that feeling of having the rug pulled out from under you and like reliving that grief and trauma all over again, you capture it like so succinctly in the way you draw, not only in uh like your composition of the panels and stuff, but like your line work too. There's just like an immediacy and an urgency, and it just feels like you capture it as soon as you feel it. And like I really I wish I could do that too. It's very moving.
Oh, thank you.
Was was the well, and this can be for both of you guys too, this question. There was the I guess I mean decision, I guess, to draw those dreams or in a sense like write and illustrate about your grief. When you start that process, was it a conscious decision hoping that it can help you like process your emotions, or was it just something that's like instinctual where um I don't know, like you're not even thinking about it helping you, that you just like you just naturally, want I need to put this out, otherwise it's gonna drive me crazy kind of like mindset? Or is it
Mhm.
more of like, I hope this can help, or I hope this can um take me to a better place? Like what is that mindset for you guys?
The comic that AJ has, I think that was about maybe 4 or 5 years after my friend had passed. So it felt very, very fresh, very raw, and the dreams felt very, very real. And it very much felt like I there is all this stuff in my head, and I need to push it out in like in some way or form. Um, and like I didn't really think of it as a processing tool. When I did 49 days, that's like, yeah, it was about 15 years. And, I'm not having as many dreams, but, obviously I'm like, Andrew is still in my life and in his own way. And so the approach was very, very different. And when I was making 49 days, it felt like I took like a really big step back and I could see like the big picture in a way. And when I had made the Art Center comic, all I felt was like sadness. Like there was nothing else. It was just like devastation, sadness, like how do I fill this hole? But when I was making 49 days, it actually was the opposite. Like I felt a lot of gratitude. And like even though there was initial sadness, I think making the book really let me have the time to reflect on the impact that Andrew had on my life, and like how wonderful our friendship was. And like I was just like, I'm really grateful that I had this time. And like, yeah, it took a really long time to kind of get to that point, but I'm really glad that I was able to get to this point and just be happy for what we had. And I think ultimately that was like one of the messages in the book too, that like, yeah, it's obviously terrible when a life is cut short, but there's a lot of good moments that go with it. Or, yeah, there's a lot of good moments that we can appreciate.
Can we rewind a little bit? Like your book, um tell us all about it. How
Yeah,
tell us
start from
how
the
you
beginning.
yeah, how it all came to be, you know? We'd love to dive into that.
Uh, I think my book came about in a very, very unconventional way. I got very, very lucky. So Andrew passed away in the spring, and like every spring it's very like on top of my mind. And at the time, I was taking a risograph comics class at SVA in New York, and we needed to figure out like some kind of idea for the final project, which was a 32 page Riso printed comic. And so, because I was thinking about Andrew, and it was just like that time period that I was thinking about death, and then, my mom was Buddhist, so I was thinking about Buddhism, and over the course of all these years, there's always been like ideas that have floated around. And Bardo, the Buddhist concept of, after death, there's a period of 49 days. Um, really seemed very interesting to me. And I was like, maybe I can make this into a story. And I just remember how, I guess, kind of like repetitive grief felt in the early days. Like, you're just sad, right? Like, you're just sad. You're kind of like repeating things and wishing things differently, but it takes a long time. And then, so I thought, like, oh, what if, this character who has passed away, like something catastrophic happens to her every day, and it's kind of like a groundhog day situation. So that's where I started with. But this was 2020, and the pandemic hit, and the class was actually canceled before the final project ever happened. So I just had these like very small thumbnails in my back pocket, and then I never looked at it again because I was like, well, it'll never happen. And I had been in conversation with an editor from Levine Credo, I think maybe like a year or two prior. He had seen the ACL comics actually, and he had initially asked me if I wanted to make a graphic novel. And I said yes, I would love to, but I didn't really have like a story that I felt super confident about. So at the end of 2020, he had reached back out and asked if I had anything in the works. And I was like, oh, I have this one idea that I think like could expand into something bigger. Like, I think it has some potential, but I didn't really think anything of it. And he really liked the pitch and was like, here's a contract. And I was like, okay, I guess we're doing this. So yeah. And then I spent, I think, the next year and a half ish, working on like the draft and the pencils. I did I did a fellowship at Center of Comics Studies in Vermont, or White River Junction, Vermont, and Cornish, New Hampshire, and that was really great. That was like 5 weeks of solitude. So I was just it was just me and the book, and I figured everything out during those 5 weeks, and that was really really beneficial. Then after that, I think bringing the art to final was the easiest step for me, because I was like, okay, now I know what to do. Like, we're just gonna churn this out, and that's the journey of the book. But I was working full time at the time, and that was really tough. Yeah, I know you worked full time on your book too, so it's not a good time.
Well, the book is amazing.
Yeah, I think when I finish reading it, I mean, I texted AJ, and I looked back at our messaging like chat, and I think the exact quote I wrote was, "Every time I see someone pull off simplicity so beautifully and poignantly, it makes me question my entire art practice." And then I may have like added a little like sad crying face.
Oh my god!
Yeah, effortless, Agnes.
Oh,
Making
thank
us
you.
look bad.
Oh, please. Oh,
I just had a question about like, a little bit more technical question about
mhm,
the creation of the book, because your editor loved the pitch of it, and I 49 days. As I was reading it, there are many, and I talked to AJ about this, but there are a lot of elements where you don't explain anything, and or like not outright to the reader, and the reader kind of has to figure things out. I mean, I was just rereading this yesterday, and like literally, like, there's no opening narration. Like, the first thing that the main character says is shit. Like, that's the first word, and then you kind of just watch her figure out what's going on around, which I think is great, because then like I feel like it makes me as a reader pay more attention and just become that much more involved. But there are certain moments where I just because I've had a little experience working with books, mainly kids books, sometimes I feel like editors would want you to put a little bit more explanation.
mhm.
And there are things in here in this book, I kind of wonder like how much of that was completely you, or did you have to make a compromise, or was your editor like just okay with you doing it your way? Because like there's certain things like the making of kimchi, or even like just the honorifics,
Mm.
calling your older sister Nuna. Like there's no explanation, and you just, I mean, I'm familiar enough with like the K dramas and K-pop to catch those references, but I'm wondering like if your publisher or your editor ever said like, oh, let's help out the reader a bit, and how did you respond to that? Or maybe there wasn't at all, you know?
Yeah, my editor was really cool. He was like, "You just do your own thing." And then when I submitted the draft, I think there were very, very little changes. Like I think there was like one section when the friend Kevin like has his friends over, and they're like it was like a couple extra pages longer, and then he was like, "Maybe we cut these," and I was like, "Yeah, you're right. It doesn't feel like it's needed." But like otherwise, he was like really on board with the storytelling, and I remember in the beginning, I was like, "Yeah, I think it's gonna be like pretty sparse. Like, I don't think I'm gonna have a lot of text." Yeah, like this is just what I'm going to do. And he was like, okay. And then he would kind of like clarify some things like about the honorifics and things like that. But then he like that was it. And I think it was just more for his own curiosity than anything. So I got really lucky. Yeah, it was cool that he let me do that.
That's awesome. I mean, it could also be just you're that great at a storyteller, so it could just be like, oh, this is all perfect the way it is.
I don't know. I sent it to my sister and like and maybe it's also like the reader, right? Like I sent it to my sister and she went through like the first chapter, like the first day, and she was like, I don't get it. And I was like, I don't I don't know what to tell you. Like, just keep reading. Or like you can piece it together. I was like, I think it's that hard.
Yeah, I mean, the type of reader matters. If it's someone who loves uh figuring things out on their own, and someone who loves comics versus someone
Yeah.
who needs to be spoon fed a little bit of the information, I guess. But everyone has their thing, or maybe just it's a sibling thing.
Yeah. Oh yeah, maybe. She is my older sister, so but I know for me, I really like comics that yeah, you can like the clues are all there and like you don't need to be handheld. And I'm a big proponent of like showing, not telling.
Those moments where you're exploring each character's time with Kit, with sort of examining her room or the things that were left behind, photographs, the shrine that her brother built. Um, those
I
quiet
got
moments
I
are,
got teary. I like
yeah, those.
I almost cried when I got to that page. Like it was just, and the only reason I didn't cry is because like there was people around me, so I was like holding back tears. But wait, did we talk about just for listeners? Did we actually describe the book
No, I don't
or
think
no?
so.
Yeah, what's the elevator pitch, Agnes? What's
Okay, elevator pitch. 49 Days is the journey of Kit, who has recently passed away, and it's based on the Buddhist concept of bardo, which in Buddhism, after you pass away, you're in a state of in between for 49 days before you move on to the next stage in her life. So she has to come to terms with her death in her own world, whereas in the real world, her friends and family are grieving for her and coming to terms with their loss.
Well done, perfect.
Thank you.
Now we can rewind, start over. Now we'll patch it together in post. There is an author's note at the end where you're talking about keeping things purposely vague as it relates to Buddhism and barely scratching the surface of what this could mean for different people. What was the impetus for you to include that note?
um, I think. Well, I got really like anxious because I, my editor was describing it as like Buddhism here and there, and I was like, it's not really about Buddhism, you know. It's like, yeah. It's like it's about death, like and grieving, and this concept of bardo is just kind of like helping things move along. And then also when I was doing research for the book, there's a lot on Buddhism, and I was like, I don't know if I could get to all this or like touch on all this. There are like a lot of concepts that resonate with me, but I feel like I'm muddying the waters. And I didn't want people to be like, well, actually, there's like this aspect of Buddhism. And so I was like, this is what I know, and this is like I'm not personally a Buddhist, so like I don't want anyone to take this as like a source of truth. And on top of that, I also think grieving is like a deeply personal experience. Like you should do whatever you need to do, whatever brings you solace, um, to get to a better spot.
I did something similar in waves where I prefaced it by saying like I don't know shit about anything. So
Yeah, right. Yeah, it feels like like a disclaimer.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, I think I mean, I definitely appreciated that note saying like, "Oh, it's because I didn't know anything about Bardo
Mm.
or like Buddhism," and just saying that that's an influence for it. I think that's all it really needs. But I also like that how it's kind of like your way of trying to correct your editor.
Yeah. I
But
think it
mhm.
was his idea to put in the author's note, and I was like, actually, that's a really good idea.
Okay. Oh,
Yeah.
what a great editor.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. He let me do what I want.
For anyone listening, definitely if you really want to follow along or like get an idea of what we're talking about, definitely get a copy of the book. But there were certain moments in this scene, and I might have told you this. I mean, in the book, where you s- you simplify it so much, like figures just become like a dot or a line, and I to me that is so being so confident in your artwork. I like I do not have that confidence to be like people will figure this out. But I just want to like let you know like I appreciate like because you mentioned so many times that you're like, oh, I don't like where certain things are going or like you're overthinking it. But
Mhm.
if if anything else like or if nothing else like I think you're doing something right with the overthinking, I guess. Or was that a no-brainer?
I think it was a result of various things. I think one, I did not have as much time as I would have initially liked to work on this book. I He gave me a year to finish it, and then I
Mhm.
asked for an extension for another year, and he said no. My editor said no.
Oh.
He gave me 6 months, and so I was like, okay, 6 months is better than nothing. Um, so I didn't have time to like do more overthinking. So I felt like I really gotta kind of like hit this on the head, like on as close to the center of the nail head as I can. um, and then also, it's funny that you mentioned like confidence in like the tiny figures, because I actually don't think I have the confidence to make like such a refined or detailed character like in your painting, Sally. Like I feel like it's just like, well, it's got like little appendages. People will figure it out. And yeah, I was just like, I mean, to me, it seemed clear. So I was like, you know what? A dot is good. We're gonna leave it at that. We're gonna move on. And I did notice that like the more simplified drawings, like those came to me a lot easier, and I felt much more organic in creating them. Like, um, yeah, there were definitely certain pages, like in the real world, whenever I have to deal with like perspective, I'm like, ugh. And that definitely sucks the joy out of it. But when I was like, oh, great, like a little rectangle for a cliff, perfect, we're good.
there's a fluidity to your line, and it also expands to your other comic work and your other editorial work. But I feel like this immediacy or like handwritten quality of your line, it's so refreshing because it feels like you're embracing the initial sketch as the finish, And
Mm.
I just want to know like, do you have any advice on how to let go and maintain that energy? Because I have a very hard time like not overworking stuff.
Really? I would have never guessed that with your work. Your work feels like so it's like smooth as butter. I'm like,
But
damn.
that's a trick, you know, like that's not like they don't see me. I'm not doing any like time lapse shit that on Reels
Yeah,
or TikTok. Like no one's gonna see the ugly part of it, you know.
We're all just
yeah,
learning how we each agonize over our work. Is
yeah,
that what
right?
this is about?
Um, I'm sorry, AJ, what was your question? Sorry.
Just advice on how to let go, you know, because it seems like
Oh, how to let go.
um
Oh god. I don't know. I feel like I'm holding on to things with like a vice grip. Um,
really
Mhm.
yeah, yeah. I really do think it was like the timeline though for me. Like that helped a
that
lot.
makes sense.
Because, I think when that first year had passed, I hadn't done any like the final work. And that's why I was like, oh, can I get another year? And my editor was like, no. I was like, okay, well, I really gotta go then. And I think that helped with like the confidence in my stroke because I was like, we got 2 hours tonight. Let's try to finish like 5 pages. And then and I'm not great at digital tools, so like I tried to do as much as I could by hand. And I feel like when I do it by hand, it it really like it really forces me to like make a confident stroke. There's no control Z for me. Um, that being said, I definitely did clean up a lot of stuff in Photoshop and like made edits where I needed to. But I think that's what really led to like having such a pared back style. Um,
Hmm.
yeah. So like I don't know if like the book would have turned out. I mean, it probably would have turned out differently if I had that extra year.
Hmm.
But I am glad that I had such a short time to do the finals because I was also really worried that like the beginning would look very different from the end if I
Right.
spent too long on and because it was such a short timeline, I was like, no, that really looked like it was done all together. There's not too much variation.
You if you look at some of my work, it's definitely gotten better towards the end. And like I don't know, I'll read Chris Ware's early stuff and like his that in like because he takes forever with his stuff. By the end
Mhm.
of it, it's like a totally not different style, but you can see a lot of refinement. But
Yeah.
like so after like rounds of revisions, like working your full time job, cranking this out, what was it like? Could you describe to us like how it felt to hold it in your hands for the first time and like flip through it?
Oh, it was not positive. Let's put it that way.
Really?
Oh.
Really?
Oh,
Just like I
what?
was working on this book for so long, or like long for me. Like most of my stuff is done in like one sitting, and the book was the biggest project and the longest thing I'd ever worked on, and to be so close to something for so long, it felt like not good. And because the only things that were
Wow.
coming out into me were the mistakes, and I
Of
was like, I could
course.
do this differently. I could have done this differently. Like and it actually took me a really, really long time to look at the book fully. Like I think I got it. I was like, wow, that's really cool. Like I'll make a little post to like advertise about it, but then I would just kind of like put it away. And I would try to really distance myself. And
Wow.
yeah, it just felt like I was too close. I really like it was hard for me to appreciate what I had done. And yeah, and it was really hard to talk about it too because people will be like, "This is an achievement," and I'm like, "Yes, it is an achievement, but I just don't feel good about it. Like I felt like
Wow.
it could be better. Like I could have done better." Um,
I could kinda relate to that, actually. I mean, maybe not outright. I don't think I would say I would outright not feel good about it, but in the past when I finished, like, illustrating a kid's book and, I have it's published, I have the book in hand, and I had friends saying like, "Oh, aren't you so happy and excited?" All that work and like how when you're seeing it in real life, aren't you pleased? And I'm like, I spent so much time on this. I just want to move on.
yeah,
Like
yeah,
I think I feel relieved
yeah,
like when I see the result. Like I feel relieved to see that it's not like some of the mistakes I don't that I thought would be very glaring was not.
Hmm.
But other than that, when I've taken note of that part, I'm like, all right, what's next? Like I'm a little bit of like that too, where or it's I don't feel the joy that people would expect me to feel.
Yeah,
So
yeah. Or it's very
yeah.
fleeting. It's like, okay, yeah, it is good, but like, I'm like, let me take a step back.
Hmm.
But
Yeah.
how did you feel, AJ, about In Waves?
I had the same reaction. Well, there was a bit of like it was pretty because like you're talking about the passing of Andrew was like 4 to 5 years. Kristen passed away like a year, maybe less than a year
Mhm.
before I started that book. So I forgot that people were gonna read this thing. And once it was printed in my hands, I'm like, oh shit! Like
Yeah,
this is so
yeah,
personal. Like this is so raw. And
yeah.
I had the same reaction as well. Like there was so much. Even now, like I'm still like I just don't think I was that good at drawing when I made that. And those technical things bother me, but I hope that you can find this because for me, having so much distance from it, like obviously not the content of the book. I live that every single day, like that grief, but the book itself as an object, there are certain things that I can appreciate now that I did within that time period because I had the same thing as you. It was just like super short amount of time. If
Yeah.
I'm just running and gunning, like if this is the best I can do in this time, I just have to be okay with it.
Hmm.
But I do hope that you can like get to a point where you look at it and appreciate like the amount of work that you put into it, even though obviously the three of us have a very high bar for like what's like top tier quality work. Um, but yeah, I hope you can appreciate because it is, I know it is I think it's a huge accomplishment, but
Oh, thank you. I remember looking at it like after it was published and like flipping through it, and I was like, oh, it's not bad.
there we go.
There it is.
And I was like, okay, all right, it's not bad. It's not bad. And then I was like, well, close it and look at it another day. But yeah, I don't really, I have not opened it in a while.
Yeah, let it marinate. Like
Yeah,
I think you'll have like with fresh eyes, you'll see it pretty differently.
yeah,
Um, people's reactions to it will also give you a different perspective on what you did.
yeah,
Um,
totally, totally. Um, and I think that's like another part of the art process that is really hard to come by is like time away from your work, and that's not something that I feel like I have right now, and I think that's adding to my existential crisis. But
mhm. We'll figure it out by the end of this.
yeah,
Was it difficult to, since you were working full time as you're working on the book, like you're spending like your evenings 2 hours, 1 hour, 3 hours trying to finish it. Like just because I don't know what job you were working at that time. Were you art directing or uh
I was working at Plaid as an illustrator. Yeah, tech
oh
is where the money
oh
is.
tech work, yes. But was it difficult to switch between like that I don't know, creative
Mm,
mindset going from, drawing for someone to drawing for yourself?
um, it felt a little difficult, mostly because like I felt the pressure and I couldn't like do what I normally do. Like I think right now I'm also still working in tech. I'm contracting, and I feel like when I'm done, I want to go outside or like work out. I want to be like away from art and creating. But when I was making the book, that really wasn't an option. So I think I just felt pressure. But because I knew there was a deadline, I was like, we're just gonna have to do it. And I think I'm very good at just like putting my head down and working when there's like a very fixed deadline. Um, and so I just had to do it. But doing it every day really helped a lot. Young Agnes would have waited at the very last moment, but wiser Agnes
Yeah.
knew to do it little by little every day.
I mean, it seems like you handle the pressure so well, like you're and just, not just with like the full-time job or the book, but just, you know, I mean, I'm assuming like the working out, the frisbee and the hiking, that's one way for you to just like decompress and uh recover, because I that is how I found that that's helped me a lot too. And I've talked to AJ about this a lot, especially the past year and a half, like 2 years, where I mean, I'm just working on my books, and I'm already like, I'm so burnt out. Oh no, this is with no full-time job. So I mean, I don't know how you handle it, man. Like,
Well,
it's
I'm not
crazy.
making any art, so that's probably how I'm handling it. There's not enough time in the day. But yeah, unfortunately, I mean, this is what I've been talking about in therapy and stuff. I'm just like, I feel guilt for not making art. And like, I see other people making art, and I know I want to make art, but like, I just can't get to that point because I just like my brain is burnt out, and I'm not even doing art stuff. Like, my job is like digital illustrator vector stuff, which is not what I do, but it's close enough that like my brain is like, no more, like do something different, like go work out, go outside, watch Love is Blind, and unfortunately, like my personal art has taken like a really big hit. And so yeah, I mean, I miss the structure that making 49 days gave me, but I don't. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe I just need to make another book and then
Hmm.
get back to it.
I think it'll come back to you. Like I think when I published in Waves, I didn't want to do anything for a long time. I mean, I feel like I still haven't done anything since then. I've just been like I feel like life needs to be lived in order for you to recharge your battery, and I think you might be in a period now where um you should go camping. You should play ultimate frisbee. Like that's
Oh,
what's going to like give you, it'll reignite your passion to come back to personal art. And like we do put a lot of pressure on ourselves, even though there's like, I don't feel like there, for me personally, there's no one out there waiting for me to post
mm,
something or anything, but there is some
yeah,
internal battle.
yeah. Well,
Yeah,
thanks. I feel better
the
now.
one and I think what can help with like the guilt and whatnot, it's like I've learned, and through self-reflection and talking with friends, and also just seeing the results after like a year or two, is that to make good art, like you gotta live your life. You can't just
Totally.
be stuck to your desk all the time. Like, I remember when I just graduated, I felt so guilty not making that much art. Well, I mean, like, first of all, like, I wasn't getting any jobs then, really, like when I first graduated. So I spent that time and what little money I had, like, hanging out with friends and learning surfing from AJ and going camping and whatnot. And the whole time I was like, oh, I'm spending money I don't think I
Yeah,
deserve,
yeah,
like, 'cause I don't really have a career. Like, this is supposed to be my savings. But
yeah,
then
yeah.
I created work that ultimately people started noticing from that. And
Yeah,
it's just been just trusting that source of like happiness, I guess.
yeah, no, I think that's really yeah, that's a great way of looking at it. I went to I had a friend's wedding in the last weekend of June, and I stayed with my friend and Marin, and like it was very low key, but like talking to her about art was really nice. And then we had a friend come over, and we went to the beach, and we just had like just a chill day, like eating good food, going to the beach, sketching on the beach. And then later, I think the next morning, I like painted, and like I hadn't painted in a really long time. And I was like, wow, this feels so rejuvenating. And even like there was guilt, yeah, but I was like, it feels good. Like I'm creating again. And I hope I can continue to find moments like that by living life.
I think you will. We're giving a lot of unsolicited advice, so we apologize in
No,
advance.
I like it. I like talking with art people. I feel like
Yeah.
that's kind of what's missing in Portland. I haven't really found um, too many people to kind of like shoot the breeze about this kind of
That's why
stuff.
we started the podcast, baby. We're
Yeah,
we don't have this anymore, like
yeah,
the that sort of I don't know, the common room of art center is gone now. You know, we
Yeah.
don't we can't like all kick it and exchange ideas, but yeah, that's too real. I'm glad that I mean, for it's easier said than done. You know, I that's everything you're struggling with. I am also like that's my life as well.
Hmm.
Trying to figure it out.
I'm
Yeah, I
glad we're
think we
all in
just
this together.
yeah, for sure. I think we get a lot of advice graduating saying like about how to become an illustrator. We don't hear too much about like what to do or how to deal with being like I don't know, I guess a mid-career illustrator that's
Mhm.
like, you know, like what advice is there out right now, you know, there so I mean this is just an excuse for us to ask our friends for advice, honestly.
Good. I like it. I'm glad. Thank you for inviting me.
All right, so we have like a section where we do like it's like a rapid fire section. It doesn't have to be fast. You can take your time.
Okay.
But
Okay. Ready.
speaking of like time away from your studio, what is like a dream trip that you have planned in your head?
Ooh, I just talked about this with my friend, and I really want to go to Torres del Paine in Patagonia and do like
Oh
the big
Oh my
snap!
back.
god. Would that be a backpacking trip or what kind of trip
Yeah,
were you
yeah.
thinking?
I think like if you do the full O or yeah, there's two circuits that you can do. There's one called the W and one called the O, and I think the W is maybe 12 days or 10 days, and then O is longer. But either one, I'll be happy with.
Wow. Wow, a
Yeah.
12-day backpacking trip is that's really hardcore.
Yeah, I definitely need to train because my body is not. It's getting tired.
uh well, actually, do you have a favorite national park in the States?
Oh, national park.
I mean, you're in Oregon. You have like
Yeah,
very easy access to like the West Coast area here. Or I don't
yeah,
know.
yeah.
Like
I haven't gone to too many places. Like I'm still kind of exploring Mount Hood National Park, which seems pretty cool. Um, I feel like I mean, there's a really good state park in California that I really love, Salt Point.
mm,
That's just like the water's so beautiful, the waves are crazy, the rocks are really cool. I mean, I don't know if it's like flooded with people these days, but I remember that was like a really nice getaway. Um, and like, I feel like Yosemite is kind of a basic answer, but I feel like when you're looking down at that valley, you're like, damn, that is incredible. Like
It never
that,
gets old.
yeah, it
yeah,
never gets old. And I'm just like, so beautiful. And yeah, I wish it wasn't like as overrun, but yeah, it's beautiful.
I mean, if you can definitely go to Tuolumne, which is just a little bit further out. Because I
Oh
mean,
yeah, yeah,
there's less people, but I mean, if you like backpacking, like you know, that automatically cuts down a ton of people
yeah,
just
yeah, yeah,
because
yeah.
it is so much. You know, even Yosemite, like people would think that it'd be chill, but once you get out of like the touristy area of Yosemite, it becomes like, you know, the backcountry. It becomes pretty like, you know, you're on your own.
Oh yeah, 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 yeah. I did
Yeah.
Hetch Hetchy once, and that was pretty cool.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right, how about a how about a cartooning question?
Mm.
Who would be your cartoonist Mount Rushmore?
Oh, oh my god. Ugh. I'm so bad with names. Okay, I'm just gonna talk about people who I feel like were really influential to
Yeah,
me
sure.
as an
Open it
artist.
wider. It doesn't have to be a cartoonist. It could be
Yeah,
a
yeah.
painter. It could be
Um, so Trina Shart Hyman was the illustrator that I was like in love with as a kid. And like any time I found out she illustrated a book, I was like, I'm picking up that book and I'm gonna read it. And she, yeah, very beautiful illustrations for fairy tales and things like that. Will Eisner really taught me like how to use the brush, I feel. And I think he was probably one of the first like comic people were like he just told stories from his life, and I was like, oh, that's really cool. Um, Dave Mazzucchelli, who wrote A Serious Polyp, is my favorite graphic novel, and I think the time that he spent to refine that book was just something that like I really aspire to. I don't know if I could spend 10 years on making a graphic novel, but that would be nice. I mean, I feel like also Jillian Tamaki is kind of like low hanging fruit because she's so good. But
So fucking good.
I mean, yeah, I think she's just like such an inspiration, and like the breadth of work she has, and also like the subject matter that she addresses. It really ranges from like fantastical to like very very personal, and yeah, very inspiring.
Great list. But yeah, Jillian, god
Yeah.
damn.
I know.
Mm.
Yeah. She was a big inspiration at school. I felt like everyone was like, "This is who you should be if you're gonna go
For
into editorial."
for sure.
Yeah.
And also her like her foray into comics, like the
Mhm.
illustrator to cartoonist pipeline, like she kind of broke that door open for us a little bit.
Yeah, really, truly.
To all the other stuff she's doing, like with the quilts and, she's just so
Yeah,
experimental
teaching.
too. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
crazy. Well, thank you so much, Agnes. Like
Oh
I think that's a
yeah.
great spot to end with like all these amazing people that inspired you.
Hold
And
up. You got one
oh,
last question,
I
Sally.
I don't want to take up too much time. All right. Wait, Agnes,
Yeah,
you
I mean,
okay with one more
yeah, yeah,
question?
yeah.
It's the most important question of the entire interview.
Wait, which one? Are we talking about the last one?
Yeah.
Wait, which one? Oh, I I mean, I don't clearly, we all know you adore your lovely Muta in the background right there, or your kitty cat. Would you, if money was no, limit, sky's the limit, would you have another cat or would you have more pets? Like any, any
This
other
is
little creature you want to add?
this is the easiest answer. I would 100% get another cat. But because he's such a good cat, what I would have to do is create a cat sanctuary, and I would foster the cat. And then
uh,
once I see that he like really is good friends with one of them, then I would shut the business down, foster this one cat, and then yes, have a friend for Buto. But that might be a really
Perfect.
long time coming.
Thank you so much for taking the time.
Yeah, yeah,
Anything you want to plug? Anything you want to talk about?
I'm good. I have nothing else to say.
Perfect.
Yeah.
yeah. Who needs
Awesome.
to promote ourselves anyway?
Yeah.
It's all about the art. If
Oh, I guess
it's
buy my book maybe.
yeah, buy 49 days.
Thanks.
If you can't afford it, check it out the library. That can always
Yes.
help too, and that helps the library out.
Yeah.
We're always pro libraries here. Awesome, thank
We did it.
you.
Thank you, Agnes.
Yay. A great big thank you to Agnes for stopping by the PA studio. It's been years since I've talked to her actually, and I'm so happy that we were able to catch up. And what's really funny is that she's exactly the same from I think about 8 almost 9 years ago since I've last talked to her. And I mean, you can see why I loved her as a TA, especially since I went to art center straight after high school. So I was this really green, essentially very naive, dumb teenager who was realizing what I had gotten myself into. But Agnes's like her candor and calm can do attitude to everything. It really allowed me to take a step back and just look at the bigger picture and not be overwhelmed by everything.
Yeah, Agnes was a great guest. So relatable. such a good conversationalist. As you can tell, I was stumbling all over myself, just trying to agree with everything she was saying, because everything she did say really resonated. Um, it is hard to find time to make work that means something to you when you're juggling external and internal pressure, deadlines, bills, self doubt. But I'm glad we solved all of our problems in this one conversation.
Yeah, that's all it takes. Just a chill combo with AJ and Sally. Anyway, remember our email is plainairpodcast@gmail.com. Don't hesitate to ask questions or send comments or guest suggestions, etc., etc. Don't be afraid. We're illustrators. And if you know anything about illustrators, we're all just shy, sheltered dogs desperate for love.
As always, thanks to the PA boys, Fernando Nunez, Keith Hernandez, and John Lee for the music, and our reluctant yet reliable audio engineer, Vincent Deng.
Sponsor? Sponsor? Do we have sponsors?
This episode was brought to you by. Fuck that! We're not getting any sponsorships anymore. The brand is Brolic. Shout out Bodega Boys. We're standing on our own feet. We don't need no Patagonia. They didn't send anything yet anyway. So we're good. Bye.
I was gonna let that silence drag. All right, yeah, bye.